Hey there, welcome to episode 137 of the Quaggling Sand audio program. I am your host, Dan Hugo. We are recording this at 7:19 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time here in Greater Vegas, but on Tuesday, June 23rd, 2026, we normally publish new episodes of Quaggling Sand on Wednesday morning. So we are way early for a change. So this will be published on the 24th of June 2026 at some scheduled automated time, probably 9 a.m. Pacific Daylight, something like that. If you're not familiar with the Quaggling Sand audio program, let me tell you, it's a term that I coined when I was very young. It's a very technical term. You probably use the normal everyday layperson term, pins and needles. Quaggling sand is that return of sensation to usually a limb. Maybe you've blocked circulation, the nerves have gone numb, and then as things head back to normal, it's of course a quaggling sand sensation. In this case, it's the quaggling of sand in the mind as stories, tales, and who knows what else is recalled and shared with you in episodes like this one titled Living on Phones. How cool is that? What does that even mean? The cover art, if you checked it out, probably looks a little weird, but that is basically the idea. Living on phones. Hopefully wherever you found this audio program, you're able to locate the episode description, which contains the show notes, including a not quite as brief as normal summary, which I'll read to you, and the usual 2 links. Nothing too crazy. I was considering linking to the particular cell phone, actually 2 cell phones that I mentioned in this episode, but they're ancient history. So you understand they are mobile phones. What else is there to know? Although the pre was an unusual one. That's one of the ones. But let's get to the summary and you'll kind of get the idea. Summary of today's episode then. A term of art, living on phones. When one lives on a phone, especially a phone under active development at a place like Apple or Palm, one uses said phone for real, even if it has all the bugs. They certainly did. Living on a phone might also happen when the laptop stays in the bag while traveling. For example, you don't have to be traveling. You could be hanging out at a coffee shop for all you know. But that's another example. As it happens, I've done both. The links, as usual, the Quaggling Sand homepage. Quaggling, if you're just listening to this, QUOGGLINGSAND. Quaggling Sand, exactly as it sounds. If you're just listening to this, how did you find it? Maybe it was randomly selected for you. I don't know. Perhaps on YouTube. That would be the first time that ever happened. A recommended podcast for you. Who knows? Quagglingsand.com. Someday will be a fully functional primary point of publication. As it is, it should point you to other places to find the audio program. If you want those links in a central location that is usually available, even if any of my websites are not, so you can still find those websites, buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo is my profile page linking everything. Hang on a second. Okay, I took a water break, but that doesn't really seem to have helped. So we'll find the weather. The weather, yeah. The weather in Vegas has been crazy hot for this time of year. I think it's throwing off every aspect of my speaking voice. We'll try to survive. So the profile page linking everything, buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo. You will find links to all of my various productions in various places, YouTube links, home pages if there is one, etc. You'll also find links to various projects. You'll find affiliate links. You don't need to spend any money. If you would like to buy me a coffee, you can. If you would like to use one of the affiliate links, these are all products that I actually use. I think I have to remove the Black Diamond coffee. I don't think that's available anymore, but I will check one last time before I do. But yeah, all those coffee beans, one time or another, I'm probably grinding with something up and not boiling, a little bit under boiling temperature, depending on the bean. But I'm probably making some coffee with one of those. So check that out. Also, if you on Monday mornings are looking for something to listen to for 5 minutes or less, the Buy Me an Update audio program inspired by the name Buy Me a Coffee and formerly, at one time, published exclusively at buymeacoffee.com/danhugo/posts. The Buy Me an Update audio program is 5 minutes or less, a quick rundown on the previous week's audio programs and news and announcements upcoming. So yeah, everything you need to know is at one of those 2 links, at least in the context of you listening to this audio program right now. So let's get on with this whole living on a phone notion. We'll start with the pre. I did work at Apple, but in the Newton group, so I never had the opportunity, for better or worse, to work in the iPhone group on the iPhone. Although I was, the first time I worked at Apple, I was in the Mariani 1 building, which is where the iPhone group was. So for what it's worth, I was there early. But I did have an opportunity to work with a lot of iPhone people who had moved over to Palm. And then I landed in the somewhat obscure Building 3 to also work on the Palm, where the pre was under round-the-clock development. Things were running late, and while they were not running awful, they could have been running better. That's why they hired me. I actually joined the QA group, that's quality assurance, because I knew the manager of that group from my days in the Newton group. He sat across we had offices, so his office was like almost directly across an open common area, whiteboards, beanbag chairs, tables, so people could have little meetings ad hoc and whatnot. So he was right across the way. I had known him for quite some time. And he said, "Hey, do you want to work in my group on this new device that I can't tell you about yet?" And so it was. It turns out he needed an engineer in his group to do what is often referred to as tiger team work. You kind of take problems as they come. Sometimes you work with other people. It's kind of a flex force, variable skill sets, not a particularly well-defined job going in. That was the usual thing for me at the time. It was often the case. My job role in circumstances such as these rarely matched the actual job description. Work in the QA group. Yeah, but you're not going to be doing QA because there was usually some sort of a gap or drama or who knows what. Here at Palm, the pre was behind schedule and everything was becoming a risk action. That is, decisions were made to put the schedule at risk. I don't know if risk action is the technical term of art in that case, but that's what these were. So they were making decisions about what should stay on the alternate vendor list or the approved vendor list. I think it's the approved vendor list. I've heard about the AVL, some other things. There was some other stuff going on a, you're changing a tire on a moving car on a racetrack. It's very exciting. In this daily pressure environment, we were encouraged to live on devices if we could spare them, to increase testing to constant. So they were always in use. Even the CEO of the company, John Rubenstein, would use the pre every day on his commute to Sunnyvale. I can't remember if he lived on the peninsula or all the way up in San Francisco. Probably San Francisco. So he used to commute on down to Sunnyvale on Caltrain. I used to ride the Caltrain. It's a reasonable commute path. You don't have to worry about driving, which meant he had a fairly consistent usage environment with Wi-Fi and cell access varying in about the same way along the trip. So the trip was the same duration pretty much, which meant power consumption should be about the same, battery life, does it heat up, and so on. So variation can be seen either explicitly, like the battery life is 10 minutes less, or the Wi-Fi dropped out this many times, or cell service was inaccessible what it normally should be, et cetera, right? So these are explicit things. But there was also that sort of feeling that something would be different now and then. I think we've all had it at this point where you're like, it feels slower. It feels like it's not doing what it normally does, right? So you get that sort of just that familiarity comes into play. And you get that from using the device all the time. So he would arrive at work from his train ride. He would come in and come to our group, Building 3, usually with the phone in his hand, and he would say, "This is happening," or "This is not happening." So we called these Ruby bugs. But in general, by living on a device during development, you can develop a feel for power consumption, Wi-Fi connection, cell data, actual heat if it gets warm or hot. Phones can get really, really hot if you're not careful. Those are software problems usually. Any number of things that we will notice as development continues through the timeline. So you get a better feel for, this is not as good as yesterday's release, that kind of thing. So they call it living on the phone. Life on the pre, well, first of all, a lot of people were living on them if they had the device. 2 members of the kernel team, so they definitely had a device that they kept in their possession all the time. They were photographed using their pre-devices. 2 of them were both holding the phones up to take a picture. And they were outside, it's in the wild, as they used them to take photos of some event going on somewhere in the Bay Area. The photographer who took a picture of them doing this was standing behind both of them as they both snapped this photo of the scene that was in front of them, while the photographer got a solid, no mistaking who they were. Even from behind, you could tell who they were. Solid photo of the phones in use. You could see that the screens, the flip, not a flip, but a slide down keyboard. You got a really good view of the device in use. It was published for the world to see, and while it was not the end of the product by any means, nor the end of the 2 kernel developers, it was not a pleasant conversation they had about living more quietly on their devices. So good times. I mean, I'm sure they got punished in some way. I don't know. What are they going to do? You're essential to this product shipping. We're already late. So hold out your wrists and we will slap them. Something like that. It wasn't. There were no bruises. Anyway, you may have heard stories about iPhone prototypes being left in places sometimes. Often it will be left at a bar, maybe on a bar stool, or somebody left a prototype, and those will get noticed. Probably somebody gets a little or a big tip, like, hey, somebody left the new iPhone here. I don't think it's a shipping product. Oh, let me take photos of that, please. Thank you. In general, whenever a device in development leaves the enclave of development, the odds of this happening go up. Such is life. It's sort of an essential practice, but you just have to be more careful. So these things happen. Sometimes people get fired. So it depends on, I think leaving a device behind might get you fired. Having it photographed in the wild is maybe, you can spin that into marketing, right? I, on the other hand, could not live on the device I had because they were hard to come by during this rapid development cycle. So if you were lucky enough to have a phone all the time, you probably had one phone all the time. And the one device I had available to me was usually running something all the time, hooked up to a host machine to capture data and whatnot. And besides, one time the director of engineering asked me why I was still carrying my BlackBerry around on a little clip-on case on my on the pocket of my jeans, actually, instead of using the pre. I said that I needed a phone that worked. The response was still not as bad as my 2 colleagues getting photographed in public, but the laugh was not quite comfortable. Like, are you making fun of us? Because it's your product too. And I was like, no, I need a phone that works all the time. But also my phone was always attached to something. So a different kind of living on the device. The take home though is not too far from what you have when you have your phone, whichever kind it is, doesn't really matter nowadays. And you maybe receive a software update. It's called an over-the-air update, OTA. And you begin to notice differences with battery life. The most popular, I think that's the thing that most people will get the most upset about, especially if the devices are getting warm or hot in the pocket. It's never popular. And Wi-Fi stability is maybe second on the list. It'll drop connections. We tend to notice a hot device in our pocket, network connection dropping sometimes or all the time. I've seen that, not as much lately. Maybe something with the camera. Those are fairly complicated subsystems. The more complicated the subsystem, the more likely it is to be tweaked in an update. They'll fix a bug and they'll break something else. And so the more likely it will behave noticeably differently. And because you live on your phone, just like everybody else, right? It's always on you or near you. You will spot these differences fairly quickly. And then add to it that everybody will start posting their conspiracy theories immediately. So you may be like, hey, my phone is, oh yeah, everybody else is seeing the same thing. Okay, it's not just me. The developer team really does need to live on their development devices through the development cycle. I've seen some cases where some egregious bugs have slipped through to over-the-air updates for Android, where it was just clear that nobody took the time to test particular. In one case, it was when you had alternate users configured on your device, it would cause the system would boot loop. It would not go all the way to booting. That's ugly. That's not good. And that just means they didn't test it. That would be something. If your phone can't boot all the way up to a running system in a known configuration, it's not a hack. It's not a what do you call it? Jailbroken ROMs or anything. Totally standard software feature. If the phone can't boot when that feature is in use, somebody didn't test something, which means they're not living on their devices. So the developers really need to do that. But because we were developing a phone that was not yet available, so nobody had a pre, and this actually remained the case for a long time after they shipped, because unfortunately nobody had a pre. It's kind of a joke, but not really. The Android and iPhone teams have millions of people who may run into trouble in the field with an update. So all the more reason to be using, everybody have a different configuration. Hey, is anybody using the multi-user mode? Be sure and test that out maximally. We don't want to run into that problem again, et cetera, et cetera. So low-hanging fruit, easy way to make sure you ship a usable product, which people don't do anymore. The exciting world of travel. This is the other kind of living on a phone. So many, many years later, I think I worked at Palm in 2012. I think that's right. And somebody can check. Whenever the Palm Pre was shipping, I was working there for a couple months prior. I came in at the end, but at a critical time. I got a bonus, which was they were not handing out bonuses to anyone. But because I prevented the product from shipping with a known this flash part will fail in the first 6 months of use scenario. So we removed that flash part from the AVL. And then we found I'll get to this in a second. No, I won't. I think I'm done with the pre. So we found a second problem. I think I'm going to talk about this later. I wrote this, but I apparently didn't read it. Found a second problem. That was just getting lucky. We knew there was the first problem. We didn't know what it was. Then we identified there was a flash part. Then I just randomly found a second problem with the final. Yeah, I definitely talked about the final option. So because I saved the product from shipping in a state or with a configuration that would absolutely break in the field and catastrophically, I got a little bonus, which was nice, I guess. A little something extra. A very little something extra. So that was somewhere in 2012. And then I moved to Vegas in 2013. I started working for Intel in officially in 2015. No, 14. Yeah, it was end of the year. No, when was it? It was 2014. Anyway, no, that doesn't sound right. 2012 I don't know when it was. It was several years later. I took a job with Intel. I should know these things. It stops mattering at some point. I took a job with Intel Corporation after relocating to Las Vegas. I did that in 2013. I know that's true. Hey, I'm just going to check. Hang on. All right. I have 8 years later, and in my mind, I was thinking it's either 2008 or 2012. It was 2008. It shipped in 2009. So I was working there in 2008, towards the end of the year. And so 2008 to 2014. So I guess it was more like 6 years, not 8. I can do math. So I started the job with Intel Corporation after relocating to Las Vegas, in no small part because I would be traveling for work. So that was kind of the appeal. Like, do you want to get this job and you have to travel around and this and that? And it was because I had to travel so much that I said, well, I don't have to move back to the Bay Area, right? Because it's much cheaper to live in Vegas. At the time, that was true. It's less true now, but it's still true. So I was based in Vegas and I was traveling everywhere all the time. It was something of an understatement, as it turns out. And I had not traveled much at all in the several years prior. I had an expired passport, no suitable luggage, and certainly no sense of how to do this sort of travel I was in for. There were times when I was traveling every weekend. I was home, 2-3 days a week. I was either traveling or at a hackathon, or sometimes I would be gone for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 6 weeks to be at development sites, Intel sites usually, time in Italy at the Arduino site. I should state here, totally enjoyable, even though it was a grueling schedule sometimes, but I would totally do it again. If anyone's hiring, I would do it again. I honestly do not remember which Android device I had at the beginning of the adventure window. So when I When it was 2013, I moved to Vegas. I don't remember what kind of phone I had. It was not a pre, some sort of an Android device. 2014, I think. Yeah, I guess I started in February of 2014. So, yeah, I moved. Yeah, okay. Moved to Vegas August 2013. Then CES. My future manager, who was actually a colleague at Palm, my future manager was in town for CES. We had lunch, dinner, maybe. Had the conversation. A couple weeks later, I was in Santa Clara having my NEO, my new employee orientation. So doing the Intel thing, I had to get a passport and everything. And my first trip to Ireland was in April. Don't worry, I would be in Ireland for St. Patty's at some point, I think the following year. But I had nothing. I had no luggage suitable for this sort of travel. I had I was not really fully prepared for this. And I should state again, totally enjoyable. So I honestly do not remember which Android device I had, as I said. So whatever it was at the beginning, I eventually, and it might be because I broke the phone or something happened. I mean, when you're traveling that much and when you're relying on the phone so much, of course it's going to break or something's going to go wrong. So I upgraded to a Motorola-made Google branded Nexus 6. If you've come across that phone, you may remember it. It was very popular, a very totally useful device. I have to say it was just about perfect for the world traveler, in my opinion. It was not perfect for everyone across the board, but I don't know that I've found its equal, mostly because of the size of the device. The screen was large, so I had a lot of real estate for what I'm about to describe, and also thin and relatively light. It was light enough to not weigh down a vest pocket. I will mention my Scott E-Vest soon. And then it worked everywhere. It worked in all the countries I was visiting. This will get some more detail. Hang on. In my early days of travel, I would actually get local SIMs so that I could use cell data at reasonable rates instead of roaming. Although this would lead to confusion when some people would have my local phone number in the country in question, which would then be unreachable when I switched back to my US SIM, or if I was using my French SIM or Italian SIM or back to the Irish SIM. But at the time, in 2014-15 timeframe, you basically you could get a prepaid SIM, and if I was only going to be in the country for a couple of weeks, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. When I was in Ireland, I was there for 6 weeks, so I did have to go top off, as they say, my 3 SIM, the phone company called 3. So having the different SIMs, and the phone worked in all these places, so that was nice. Not a huge deal, but there was no trouble, it just worked. Eventually, I would get Google Fi. So it was a complicated situation having to deal with all these SIMs in my bag. I had a little clear, like the kind of Ziploc bag that you get an electronics component in. So I would just have the SIMs in there, and I could tell which one was which, of course, because they're all labeled. But not ideal. So when Google Fi became available, I gave it a shot, and it turns out it was perfect. It worked perfectly well. This is not a compensated mention. I'm not getting paid, or it's not a spot. I'm not promoting their product, but it really just worked. It worked in China. It worked in Asia in general. It worked in all the European places, obviously around the US. So it solved all of that problem, making that phone essentially perfect. I still use Fi to this day, many phones later, though I can no longer recommend it. And in fact, 3 people I referred to sign up all turned it down, which means I didn't get my $60 per person, I think it is, because it was just not a good experience during their sign-up attempts. So thanks, Google. It's Google. It's no surprise, right? They kind of suck when it comes to things like that. So living on an Android device when you're traveling, here are the details. I've never really spent any quality time with an iPhone, but I seem to recall around that time that they were fairly locked down, in that you couldn't, like, the whole system was locked down. You couldn't really customize home screens and all this. So the legacy of Steve Jobs, very uptight. Too bad. So customization was a tricky business. Maybe it was possible. I don't know. But Android out of the box, totally, get a custom launcher, could do whatever you want. So you didn't have to worry about the Android. You could do whatever. And I quickly landed on a launcher with multiple home screens. And I do not recall the one I was using early on. I used to try out different launchers to try to get something that worked for me. And Nova was the go-to eventually. But somewhere in between there, I don't think I was using Novo yet. Maybe towards the end of my Intel tenure. Novo's kind of set the bar, kind of set the standard for a fully customizable launcher. But now I've settled on the Lynx launcher, Lynx, if you're curious. This will sound a little obsessive, but in situ, this was about as useful and intuitive a setup as I could imagine working on the go. So this was my absolute daily driver configuration when I was, getting my bags packed, waiting on a lift, or if I drove myself to the airport. What's the traffic like? So here's the setup. Why multiple home screens were essential. So my maximal utility configuration. My main home screen. So that was the default home screen. That's where it would always start. Main home screen had a calendar widget, an alarm clock, some utility apps like Lyft and Uber, Google Maps, where my home was my home on Google Maps, and my work address was Las Vegas International Airport. It used to be McCarran, but now it's Harry S. Reid, of course, with a few other useful things for day-to-day when I was not traveling or when I was about to depart for the airport. Making the work address the airport meant that Google would always tell me what my commute time would be at any given time. So I would always know how long it would take to get to the airport, see? There was a travel screen, so I could scroll, I think, to the right. Scroll the home screen to the left, so it was to the right. The travel screen, this had airline widgets and link shortcuts for flight information, a link to an app that has, it was killed off, like they stopped developing it and then they removed it from the app stores and so on. It was developed by the people who developed Sabre, which is the database for flight information and so on. It was called Tripcase, and it was fairly brilliant for itinerary tracking. So it was a sad day, honestly, when it was killed. But I had some sort of an itinerary tracker before I found Tripcase, and a couple of world time widgets set for the home time, the destination time, and any layover airport times, and a few other utility links. By the way, this also is the only reason I got a smartwatch, was because the smartwatch would sync up with my phone, which would reset its clock when we landed, and it contacted a local cell site. Then it would get the current time. So knowing that the time on my wrist was correct in my new locality meant that even if I was napping on the plane, I woke up, we're pulling up to the gate, look at the watch, that's what time it is. So it's all about flow. So the travel screen was essential. That is where my electronic boarding pass would be once I checked in and whatnot. However, I always use paper boarding passes. I'll get to that in a second. Then there was the destination screen. So I think that was to the left, or it was two to the right. I can't remember. Which had a local weather widget. So it would always tell me what the weather was going to be when I got there. So I would use that when I was making some packing decisions, of course. The local time widget, so world time, but for that locality. Of course, my phone would be reset to that time. I just mentioned that. But if I was en route, if I hadn't landed on the ground yet, I could always check the destination time before my clock was reset. So I would always know that it was set or not, things like this, the little things. And basically the most important thing when I landed was what did I have to do after I got my bag? Where was I headed? And yes, I checked the bag frequently. I'm not so uptight that I needed to go carry on only. I was never in that much of a rush. I'm totally fine waiting at the baggage claim. It's kind of part of the whole experience, so I never had an issue with that. And then, of course, any relevant destination links, like anything related to the hackathon I may have been headed to in that destination, maybe less specific stuff for my visits to the Intel site, so I kind of knew the areas eventually, especially the Leak Slip site, which is very near Dublin, which I frequented more than the Intel site in Santa Clara, where my team was actually based. So I spent more time at the Ireland and Intel sites than any other sites for Intel on the planet, which was fine. It was quite a time. So those were the 3 screens. And then there was maybe another screen for who knows what, right? I mean, I wasn't traveling 100% of the time, almost. But yeah, multiple desktops, absolutely essential. Multiple home screens, I should say. And then a launcher that did what I needed it to do at the time I needed it to do it. And why paper boarding passes? I'll just tell you right now. More than once, I would see that somebody's phone died. They dropped it, like literally as they were approaching the jetway to, here's my boarding pass, bleep. You put your phone on the scanner. Oh my God, broken screen. That's not funny, but you never know what was going to happen. So I always printed a paper boarding pass, always, 100%. But I always had the same, the tools available either way. So I kind of had this whole workflow developed, and it was really phone centric. I did have the work laptop, a MacBook Pro with a Retina display, whatever. My days of being an Apple person had long since passed, but we had the MacBook, which we needed since Arduino tools supported Mac OS, Windows, and Linux, and we had to be able to use any version of it and so on. This Apple device supported all 3 from a licensing perspective and compatibility with the tools, though Intel IT supported, really preferred to support other, usually Dell or Lenovo, I think, laptops. They were not a fan of the Mac, even though it was an x86 Mac product line, but such is life. However, the ability to have information available at any point in the journey, any point, from before I left home till I returned home. The device that was in my pocket was easy to charge, did not require any boot up time. It was just on. Didn't really need a table, or I didn't need to hold it with the screen open and have one hand. Right, phone, perfect size. The Nexus 6 had a large screen, so I could have all these icons and shortcuts and widgets and all that. But it was still just the right size, so it wasn't too big. It wasn't a phablet. It was right on the edge of too big, but also big enough. Boot up time, coupled with my absolutely recommended Scott E-Vest. I had the travel vest. Now, they did have an inner pocket with a clear plastic touchscreen compatible panel, so you could touch your phone and interact with it without taking it out of the pocket, and you could see the display. I found that was actually a great way to make 2 sweat rectangles on your shirt, because they absolutely did not breathe. And yeah, so I was not a fan of that. I was very tempted at times to cut them out, but I did put my phone in there, so that's life. But the phone fit in there. Everything was perfect. Honestly, the Nexus 6 probably made a lot of my travel possible whenever things got a little dicey with delayed or canceled flights, or trying to figure out how to get from point A to point B and wherever I was landing and so on. And yeah, the ability to have information available at any point in the journey, and having the configuration set up ahead of time, the different home screens and so on. The phone became the primary travel device, and it was completely and totally functional and useful. Coupled with my absolutely recommended Scott E-Vest, like I said, there was no need to even think about opening up my laptop bag for anything. I mean, I could, obviously, but if I had to get from, gate 3 to gate 28, I was good to go. Didn't have to touch a zipper. Phone was ready to go with the next boarding pass. I had the paper boarding pass in a different pocket in the Scott E-Vest. It was all set. So I rarely had an issue where I was not equipped with the information and tools that I needed. It was one of my finer moments, several of my finer moments, but the travel in general, one of my favorite and most enabled, I'll call it challenging task, right? Certainly wasn't sitting in a cubicle. So the take-home lesson from all this, both modes of living on a phone, put that in air quotes, were somewhat educational and more similar than I would have thought before I did both of these. So for better or worse, the mobile phone, or nowadays it could be a tablet, a foldable, an e-reader that happens to also run Android apps, probably not iPhone apps, and who knows what else is coming, can be essentially an extra limb, or maybe an extra opposable thumb, right? Tools that you are absolutely using constantly, maybe an extra brain even. Some people are into that with personal knowledge management tools and all this. But essentially, there are people who, and I was one of them for a while, who are absolutely dependent on the phone functioning. One time my phone broke because I tripped. I tripped on a curb here in Vegas, and I was home. I was home for a couple of days. It was really cold. It was in the winter. I stepped off a curb, but I stepped off with my heel on the curb, so my toe dropped down, and so I ended up lunging forward. I was in a winter coat because it was particularly cold, but I had my phone in my hand. The phone hit the asphalt, and that was the end of that phone. Totally shattered. Literally had a brand new phone the next day. That's how dependent I was on it. And it was Intel money. No, I did not expense it because it was my personal phone, but I was like, having the phone is essential. It's part of my entire, that's how I make my money basically as an Intel employee. Was traveling, so had to be equipped. So piece of cake. Another time I dropped probably that phone. I was on a bus here in Vegas again. Vegas is bad for phones. And the bus hit a bump and the phone literally just slipped through my hand. Like I didn't have a good enough grip on it. Slipped down, and because of where I was sitting on the bus, it had a maximal distance, falling distance. It landed on a corner and a huge collection of cracks just. So another new phone. So I think I had 3 Nexus 6 phones. Totally worth it. Totally worth it. So yeah, extra limb. Absolutely. It is precisely because of this that a potential use case, maybe for a so-called power user, which I would say I was a power user, that it's absolutely important. It's critical for developers to live on the phone during development, especially if it's a shipping product. So you're developing for a software update, software patches or updates during, or maybe a major software like OS version update. And to learn to notice when things are not quite right as the developer, because I will guarantee you from personal experience, the power user will notice almost immediately, and it is no fun to learn these things en route to somewhere. Like, oh no, my battery life is down by 30%. That kind of breaks the routine. Although everyone has at the time, everybody had battery packs for charging, so it wasn't a trip killer, but it was certainly one of those things that would throw a little tiny wrench into the works. At Palm, my initial focus area was indeed power management, which was it was sort of the on-ramp to the QA group. So when my first day, I got the tour of how we measure power. So every single day, every time there was a new daily build of the operating system for the Palm Pre, first thing, test and see whether the power management went south, right? I mean, if the phone's going to melt in your pocket, you don't want to kill that release. So it was called the build acceptance test. It was power check for any major egregious power consumption problems or phone heating up, and kill the build if needed. And so that was like the first step into the group. I didn't really do that too long. It was a couple weeks, and then I moved to automation and then to setting up what I called an octopus to isolate a catastrophic flash problem, which I already described, which actually led to finding another problem, which I also described, in our third and final flash vendor on our alternate vendor list. And here again, it was actually attention to detail that won the day, whether I was actually living on the phone in my pocket or living on the phone attached to my host machine to capture data. So either way, I was taking careful note, I was paying careful attention, making the effort of understanding what the device was doing day over day when things were changing. So the science is the same. The practice and the route to the solutions or the data may be different, but same basic idea. The scenarios I've described, whether in the lab as I was doing or traveling so much, push a mobile device out to its functionality edges. And in those cases, the edges will be pushed a bit further and maybe even farther, if possible, especially by the power user who's going 211, if I can just throw all the metaphors out there. And that power user will know when the edges become fragile. During all of my travels, I have to say my systems worked. Every once in a while, you'd find that edge and you'd be like, this is phone's starting to get a little warm now. And that just means you're finding the places where they didn't really test to make sure you don't hit a higher than normal power consumption level. So the current's a little bit higher, battery's discharging a little bit more, getting a little warm. There were a couple of things but basically the phone worked, except when I would break them. But definitely, without a doubt, like no matter how much I use my phone now, I've never used any device so much, so continuously as I did as using my phone, living on my phone for the purposes of travel as often as I did. So that was definitely pushing the limits of what a electronic device could do. Totally understand where people depend on these things to just work. And it really shines a light on some of the stuff, as I mentioned, like if there's a new software release and you get a patch and your phone doesn't work anymore, or which is not funny, but if it's that dumb, I mean that's just a failure at all levels of product development, testing. The developers have to use the device. It has to be something that they would be proud shipping, and when that happens, nobody should feel proud about that. That's ridiculous. So definitely a first-person experience on both sides of that transaction. So yeah. Final point, I will also add, I was so tuned into my personal workflow all the way from home to home, the whole loop. The one time, because I was at the premier counter for United at Terminal 3 at Las Vegas International Airport, LAS, some helpful, put that in air quotes, some helpful person decided to try to help me. And it turns out he completely broke my departure workflow. Yeah, that was, I mean, you can't push the guy or hit him, but it was very tempting. It was recoverable, but he just totally inserted himself into like, I got this. Don't, oh, no, let me help you with this. Like, no, don't. Stop doing what you're doing. Oh, you don't need a boarding pass, sir. You already have. No, I'm printing out a boarding pass. Just every little thing that he could be annoying about and throw little micro wrenches, multiple, into my workflow. That was it. So it was recoverable. But the entire rhythm down to getting the paper boarding passes every single time, just he decided to inject himself into this thing that I could almost do with my eyes closed. There were times when I would arrive at the gate. So I was in group 1 for United because of the premier status, whatever. I wouldn't even stop walking because I would arrive at the gate exactly as they began the boarding call for group 1. So I was totally in tune to the trip to the airport from home. Even if there was a Lyft involved, usually a Lyft, not an Uber. I hate Uber. Or if I drove myself there, every aspect of the boarding, getting to the airport, getting through if I had luggage to check or whatever the case, getting through TSA security, every aspect was so reflexive that I would get to the gate. I'm like, this is not good, but it's kind of cool that I had everything timed so well. So he really threw a wrench at that, and it was recoverable, but it was disruptive, and I didn't really care for it. And it was like somebody, if somebody with the boarding pass, it was like somebody telling me I couldn't bring my phone on the plane. It was like that disruptive that this guy had injected himself into my trained, like I didn't even have to think about it anymore, workflow. So yipes. That would be chaos if I wasn't allowed to bring my phone on. So it was not quite that extreme, but I almost wanted to call the guy and say, look, don't do that. But then there was a time when Samsung phone owners were in that boat and they were not allowed to bring their phone on the plane. So, because the batteries were boiling and puncturing and exploding. So that's no good. I shudder to think about such things. I got lucky, and I definitely learned, first of all, what the user experience limits are, and sometimes you have to exceed them. So you should always use the product, right? Eat your own dog food, as the saying goes. So I definitely can see when, especially, well, I don't use iPhones, just haven't. But I can definitely see when Android people don't do that. It's disappointing. But that's true of everything. I mean, there's a reason that a good chef or cook will taste for correct seasoning, often more than once. It's just what you do. You want to make sure that the thing you're giving to someone else does what it's supposed to, doesn't cause problems or worse, and so on. So definitely an interesting pair of experiences. And yes, strangely related, but really not so strange. If your phone in particular ever gets an update and it doesn't work, just switch to it. Switch to a Linux phone. I think we'll all be happier when we get to that point. And we're getting close, and that's the plan when I'm completely fed up with Android, which I have been many times, but got to get a Linux phone that's parity hardware. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Thanks for listening as always. A fun walk down memory lane in my travel days. Who knows? Maybe I'll travel someday and get to tell another version of this story down the road. All right, you can hear my voice is totally giving up. I hope it was not too bad to listen to. That's it. Take care. Thanks for listening. Until next time, America. Bye-bye.